You stayed in school, you took on the debt deliberately, not recklessly, but as a calculated investment in a specific future. You got the credential, updated the resume, walked across the stage, and you arrived on the other side to find the master's degree you spent 2 years and $65,000 acquiring is listed under preferred qualifications for a role paying $47,000 a year. This video is not about your choices. Your choices were rational responses to the signals the system was sending. This is about the system that sent those signals and what it was actually optimizing for when it did. For most of the 20th century, more credentials produced more earning power, and the debt required was modest enough that the math worked. That relationship broke, not gradually. Structurally, what we are mapping today is credential inflation, the process by which a qualification that once signaled competitive advantage becomes the baseline cost of being considered at all. We are mapping the toll booth, the institution that positioned itself between the worker and the middle class and began charging interest on the passage. And we are mapping the gross salary illusion that makes a credentialed career appear to pay off on paper, while the actual financial architecture tells a completely different story. The ROI of education didn't break because students chose wrong. It broke because the system's incentives changed, and the debt stayed. When the student debt conversation surfaces, it arrives with a familiar set of explanations. Wrong major, wrong school, should have been more strategic, should have networked harder. These explanations share one function. They place the problem inside the individual. They convert a systemic outcome into a personal failure, which is convenient for every institution that benefits from the current arrangement remaining intact. Here is what those explanations cannot survive. The median debt load for a master's degree in the United States runs between $50,000 and $80,000. The median starting salary for a master's degree holder sits between $55,000 and $65,000. After federal and state taxes, after mandatory loan service, after the professional upkeep costs a credentialed role requires, the monthly cash position of a freshly graduated master's holder is in many markets functionally identical to, or worse than, a bachelor's degree holder who entered the workforce 4 years earlier and has been building savings ever since. This is the gross salary illusion applied directly to education. The credential produces a nominally higher salary that obscures a structurally worse financial position. The debt, the delayed compounding, the professional upkeep, none of it appears in the offer letter. The wrong major argument fails on specifics too. Law school graduates carry median debt of $130,000. Fewer than 60% obtain full-time legal employment within 10 months of graduation, the American Bar Association's own data. MBA graduates outside top-tier programs face starting salaries that frequently can't service the debt that funded the degree. This isn't about picking poorly. It is about a system that kept raising the price of the ticket while the destination quietly moved. In 1970, approximately 11% of American adults held a 4-year degree. By 2023, that figure exceeded 38%. Over the same period, the number of jobs formally requiring a bachelor's degree expanded dramatically. Not because the work changed, but because the credential became a sorting tool, a filter that required no investment from the employer to operate. When a credential becomes widespread enough, it stops signaling advantage and starts signaling eligibility. And when that happens, the market responds by requiring the next credential up. The bachelor's degree became the new high school diploma over 3 decades. LinkedIn's 2022 workforce report documented a measurable increase in postings requiring master's degrees for roles that hadn't required them 5 years prior. Not in academia, but in marketing, project management, healthcare administration, business operations. This is credential inflation operating in real time. The bar is rising not because the work became more complex, but because the supply of bachelor's degrees made them insufficient as filters. The master's degree is being consumed by the same mechanism that consumed the bachelor's before it. And the critical difference between these two inflations is the debt attached to them. When the bachelor's degree inflated into a baseline credential, its inflation-adjusted cost was a fraction of today's master's degree price. A credential that inflates into table stakes while carrying a $65,000 debt obligation doesn't merely stop generating advantage. It begins generating active harm. The holder is now paying the cost of a competitive signal the market has reclassified as the minimum. Systemic friction is the cumulative weight of this cycle. The system demands a credential, The individual responds rationally. Enough individuals respond that the credential inflates. The system demands the next one. The friction compounds with each iteration, and the tuition revenue compounds alongside it. There is a precise frame for what the modern university has become in relation to professional employment. It is not primarily an education provider in the civic sense. It is a toll booth. A toll booth doesn't build the road. It doesn't guarantee the destination. It controls access and charges for passage. The university controls the credential the labor market has designated as the access requirement. It charges accordingly, and unlike every other party in this transaction, it bears none of the financial risk of the outcome. The mechanics of systemic friction are clearest here. The employer determines which credentials are required. The university sets the price of those credentials. The worker pays the university for the credential the employer requires, and the employer bears zero cost in this exchange. The entire financial burden of what is functionally employer-driven job training has been transferred to the individual, intermediated by an institution with no stake in the worker's outcome. This transfer has a history. Through the mid-20th century, large American corporations invested substantially in internal training. They hired at entry level and developed specific skills in-house. The credential required was a high school diploma. The corporation bore the training cost because it was the direct beneficiary of the trained worker's output. Beginning in the 1980s, that model inverted. Corporate training budgets contracted. Hiring criteria shifted toward credentialed applicants who arrived pre-skilled, skills acquired and paid for entirely outside the company. The professional class absorbed costs corporations had previously carried. The university system expanded to meet the demand this transfer created, and tuition, no longer constrained by a market in which students could opt out without career consequence, accelerated. Between 1980 and 2023, the average cost of a 4-year public university education rose approximately 180% in inflation-adjusted dollars. The median wage for bachelor's degree holders rose approximately 20% over the same period. The toll grew 9 times faster than the road it ostensibly improved. That is not a market correction. That is a market operating precisely as its institutional incentives require. The $1.7 trillion in outstanding student loan debt is cited constantly. It is processed, usually, as a housing problem, the graduate who can't save a down payment, or a consumption problem. That framing understates the real extraction by an order of magnitude. The true cost of student debt is not the monthly payment. It is the compounding growth the monthly payment prevents. The math is specific. A master's graduate at 24 repaying $65,000 under a standard plan makes monthly payments of approximately $680 for 10 years. Total payments, roughly $81,600. If that same $680 monthly had been invested at a 7% average annual return, the historical index fund average, it would have accumulated approximately $112,000 by the end of the repayment period alone. The full opportunity cost of a $65,000 master's degree, properly accounted, approaches $190,000 once forebound compounding is included. Before accounting for delayed housing market entry, before delayed retirement savings accumulation, before the professional upkeep costs a credentialed role silently mandates, the wardrobe, the certifications, the industry subscriptions that signal continued membership in a professional tier. The gross salary illusion completes its cycle here. The master's degree produces a nominally higher salary, perhaps $10,000 to $15,000 annually above the bachelor's baseline. Displayed without context, that looks like a return. Displayed against debt service, delayed compounding, and professional upkeep, the surplus frequently does not exist. The additional salary is consumed by the cost of the credential that generated it. The toll booth collected. The worker is approximately where they started, 10 years later, with a title change. The master's degree trap is not a story about miscalculation. It is a story about institutional risk transfer, one of the most consequential economic shifts of the last 50 years. In the post-war economy, the dominant professional development model placed risk on institutions. Corporations hired on aptitude, trained internally for specific roles, and absorbed the risk that the training might not produce the needed output. The financial burden of developing professional skills sat with the party that directly benefited from them. That model was dismantled. The credential requirement was outsourced to the education system. The financial burden transferred to the individual worker in the form of tuition. And the federal student loan program, well-intentioned in design, completed the transfer by guaranteeing financing regardless of institutional quality or graduate outcome. It severed the price sensitivity feedback loop that would otherwise have constrained tuition growth. Universities could raise prices without market consequence because demand for credentials was inelastic and the financing was guaranteed. The risk of non-repayment sat with the federal government. The risk of non-employment sat with the graduate. The university carried none. The exhaustion economy this produces is specific. Over-credentialed, under-liquid professionals carrying debt structures that require sustained high income to service, performing professional upkeep to maintain visibility in fields they invested years to enter. With optionality so constrained by monthly debt obligations that the lower stakes role, the career pivot, the sabbatical, none of them are financially accessible. The credential that promised mobility delivered a more sophisticated form of constraint. That is not an accident of individual choice. It is the designed output of a system in which the institution that sells the credential bears none of the risk attached to it. The emotional texture of the credential trap is not dramatic. It is chronic. It is the professional performing at the level their credential promised, while earning at a level the credential's debt makes structurally insufficient. It is receiving the alumni donation solicitation, addressed, without apparent irony, to someone still making monthly loan payments to the same institution. It is the continuing education requirement that arrives not as an opportunity, but as another toll, another professional upkeep cost, extracted by a system that has already been paid once for access to this career. The exhaustion economy runs hardest on this cohort precisely because the credential created an expectation mismatch. The degree signaled arrival. The financial reality requires constant high-performance maintenance just to stay solvent. There is no coasting, there is no stepping back, the debt payment is fixed, the professional upkeep is non-negotiable. The system has, through the loan instrument, converted the worker's labor into something with very limited optionality, running at the pace the debt requires, not the pace their judgment or well-being would choose. Here's the complete accounting. The credential economy extracted 2 years of your time, your early compounding years, your debt capacity, and a significant portion of your professional optionality in exchange for a salary premium that in most cases does not survive contact with the debt service, delayed investment, and professional upkeep it generated. You were not naive, you were rational. The signals were everywhere, and the consequences of ignoring them were real. The system was not honest about what it was optimizing for. Seeing the toll booth clearly doesn't erase the debt, but it changes every decision that comes next. The PhD, the second master's, the additional certification the system is already suggesting you need. It changes the questions you ask before the next toll is paid. The credential inflation cycle continues because enough people keep responding to its signals without the full accounting. You now have the full accounting. The game isn't unwinnable, but it cannot be won by playing it the way the toll booth designed it to be played.